about it. Help us out. Help us out so we can help you in return. And I don't remember exactly any off the top. I don't remember any off the top of my head, but there have been movements that have done that. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to another episode. It's a new season, a new year. We're excited for another day. It's Friday as we are recording this, and we have an amazing topic. But before we get into this topic, let's introduce this amazing individual to the side of us.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Josh Brennicky. I'm a communications major at Cal State Long Beach. I'm also a full-time social worker and housing navigator, and I also work for Insomniac. So, doing lots of things, but really grateful to be here.
Heck yeah, I appreciate you for being on here. A lot of things you got under you.
There. Uh,
So so the topic we got for today, we're talking about riots and protests. So Joshua, from your point of view, what is a riot and what is a protest?
yeah, great question. So, over the last 6 or 7 years now, I've been going and volunteering around California and Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego, at a lot of different events held throughout the country, the state, based around different contingent issues such as immigration, Me Too, anti-racism. And in that experience, I've seen quite a lot of different forms of protest, some that have broken out into what people would call riots, and others that have been and maintained to be peaceful protests. Um, so the majority have been peaceful, and those are the events I usually try to associate myself with, going and following leadership from Black and Brown people of color, LGBTQ community members, the indigenous community, where we go in what we would call a peaceful protest and gather in either a local spot of city officials, like different downtown locations, or different significant locations where uh, Black and Brown community members have lost their life. And usually with those protests, we have family members come, vigils held. For years, I participated with the Black Lives Matter Los Angeles group outside of the Department of Justice, or what we would call injustice. And we would have family members of Black and Brown community members who were killed by police. And we would come and listen to the families and hear them give testimonials of those individuals and their situation, what happened with the police, and bring awareness to the injustices committed by different departments in our city, predominantly the police department, and how there's no accountability there. Um, Often, events do get emotional and heated, and when there are a lot of people that come to attend, I have seen police intervention come into these peaceful protests, and uh, police officers aggravate members of those protests to try and spark what would someone would call a riot. And what I think the mainstream media and a lot of people that aren't familiar with um, the process of protest and civil disobedience would call riots, because people will then start yelling, getting angry at the police. And a lot of times you'll find that there's defamation of public property. You'll find looting and rioting. During the George Floyd protests in Los Angeles in 2020, I was downtown when that gathering became a protest turned riot, some would say, because there were hundreds of people, thousands of people gathering in Los Angeles, looking for accountability on police departments nationwide. And LAPD started using tear gas and attacking protesters, turning off their body cams and mics. And you saw the city kind of erupt in anger, and there was a lot of looting and rioting happening there, but it was justified. um and I think the major difference is that in this society right now, we find that people want to have things uh aesthetically pleasing, right? So they want to see people having a protest, but they don't want to see violence. They don't want to see destruction because they would make them uncomfortable. But the major difference that a lot of civil and social justice leaders have talked about is that riots are the voice of the unheard, right? So when a protest starts off peaceful and then it encounters aggressive police response, that's when you see community members start to really um, rise up and show that property isn't more valuable than people's lives, and we need to do whatever we can to make sure the message is heard. So I could keep going on. There are a lot of different things that distinguish both, but I think both riots and protests are justified in order to move things forward in social movements.
That is a big thing, especially you mentioned like the George Floyd movement. It was a protest, and the key word is peaceful, not damaging property, not disturbing the peace. And especially in America, the First Amendment right, which a lot of people do get confused, but that's for another topic. The First Amendment right is a right to be able to speak on certain things, to have a protest. That's as long as you're not, like you mentioned, as long as we're not damaging anything, where it's peaceful and calm, it's legal. You can't do anything. And then with you also mentioned too how some protests become riots because property gets damaged, people get hurt. When does that when would it still be considered a protest? Well, not really, more of a question, kind of a thought, because self-defense, that's one of those little loopholes you can get yourself into. Is someone attacks you and you can either take those hits or you can retaliate back. Like if, for example, you mentioned the police attack, so those supporters would, some of them fought back, some of them didn't, and then of course that became damage, ends
Right.
up being a riot.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really good question, is like, what do we do when the people who are supposed to protect and serve us start ignoring our concerns and physically getting violent with us when we're trying to be heard, right? And I think that in today's day and age with technology and social media, you know, letting the world see these events escalate is important to understand that there is no proper training for police departments, that they focus on hyper militarization and SWAT responses for what start off as peaceful protests, and then once you get a gathering of more than 100, the police start to get intimidated and they start throwing out these scare tactics to get people to disperse. But again, I think it is a necessary part of these movements to really break the disillusionment that a lot of people in society have around police, around the institutions that run our country, and how they don't necessarily care about the issues that we're talking about, or they'll only care on a material level, right? Where you find companies that go and put out statements saying that they support Black Lives Matter, or they, support LGBTQ rights, but then, um, they're not really doing anything to follow up and be held accountable on that. And that's where we see these riots where property damage happens to big, corporations like Target, and it's important. And I think Target is one of the corporations that did make an important stand, where after their Target was trashed, and I believe it was Minnesota, they totally let all their employees uh, be paid for not working and moving over to another store to try and relocate. and stood in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So I think by continuing to have these protests where we do see them start off as peaceful, and then we see how those events are met with police aggression, and then we see the evolution of a peaceful protest move into a riot because of that aggravation. I think all of that's very important to show on camera, to show people that are staying home. Um, and I think people can be involved and advocate in many different ways. You don't necessarily have to go out into the streets and riot and protest. But if you do see these events happening and evolving from peaceful to riot, I would really encourage people to ask, why is this happening? What sparked this turning into a peaceful event into a riot? And there are a lot of different factors. Sometimes you have aggravators from the opposite side coming in and trying to cause unrest. And I've been at events where you find people on the far right coming and going incognito into groups and starting to trash property and defame buildings, and doing it under the guise that they're with Antifa or they're with Black Lives Matter. Um, and I think that's important to catch on camera too, to show that these tactics that the right are using to manipulate the media into saying that these events that are generally peaceful are being hijacked and co-opted, and with the intention of causing unrest in a way that puts Black and Brown community members more at risk, because we know that the police react aggressively violent to these things. So, um, yeah, I think it's really important to understand though that um, everything happens for a reason, and it's not like people are just going out and maliciously intending on damaging property or attacking people. I think it's important to understand, the genuine intentions of what people are going out to do is the message of why they're there. Now, what happens once they're there is out of our control, but we can't judge the people that are there and participating in those events for things going out of control when, our whole system's out of control, and we're just basically looking for accountability on any level and doing what we can to get that accountability.
That's a big thing. Accountability, that's and responsibility. That's something on both sides. I know we're talking a lot about like police brutality, and then we're talking a lot about protester, riot, supporter side. And a lot of times we do get that mixed up that there's two different sides, and one's always good, one's always bad. And you make a great point that yes, sometimes it's black and white. Sometimes we're the good guys, sometimes we're the bad guys. Though if we continue with that mentality, that ends up creating more separation rather than mutual agreements, which protests, a lot of protests that stay as protests, luckily, they bring that acceptance in reality that, hey, we aren't being treated fairly. Let's
Right.
do something about it. Help us out. Help us out so we can help you in return. And
Right.
I don't remember exactly any off the top. I don't remember any off the top of my head, but there have been movements that have done that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Black Lives Matter is a big one that does that. I think uh, with the immigration protests and DACA and the Dreamers and anti-ICE events that have been happening around the state over the last couple of years, you really see a lot of that as well too, because that's a really complex issue where it can really connect with a lot of people on a lot of different levels. The biggest one being family, right? And you see a lot of children and elderly people going to protests around anti-ICE, anti-immigration measures of ICE collaborating with LAPD. right, to allow ICE to go into LAPD jails, and if someone's undocumented, they can just go and deport them right from there. There were a lot of efforts made by community groups and community members to make sure that those things didn't happen. But then you also see a lot of opposition from not only other community members, but law enforcement agents that would come in and again purposefully aggravate to make a peaceful group seem unruly and unjust, and what they're fighting for to seem um, unjustified in the public's eye and through the media's manipulation. Because even though they may be elders and children and people being peaceful, the media and far right opposition will want to come in and paint those people as being dangerous, right? And you have
Those
kids,
stereotypes.
yeah, kids and elderly, not necessarily the top of the danger list, compared to like mentally unstable white men, right, who are going and shooting up almost everywhere in this country. But we don't see the same designation of danger to that group, right? And that's where you start to see um, layers of systematic and institutional racism at play, really, with how protests and riots are depicted in media, and what the media deems as dangerous in our society. And you going back to the First Amendment, right? People like to say, uh, I have the right to say whatever I'd like, but a lot of people forget that they also have the right to protest and to voice opposition to the forces that we have in this country.
That is true. That was the thing you mentioned about the First Amendment, and it's funny. I know I get this mixed up myself. So with the First Amendment, right, and I forgot what the other thing is, but the freedom of speech versus the freedom of press. The freedom of speech, the government cannot write a law that prevents us to say what we want to say. Granted, it goes back to that peacefulness. I can't say go up to an individual and call him a bigot. I can't call him a racial slur just because I feel like it, because that's offensive.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too, where we're in this age of the internet, where people use that racial rhetoric and hateful rhetoric, and they disguise it under the right to free speech. However, we lose our sense of morality with our obsession with, the right to say whatever we want. Because, like you said, you can't just go up to someone. You, Mario, won't just go up to someone and say something because you morally know it's not right. But a lot of people get confused and say, oh, well, this is my First Amendment right. I can say whatever I want, and it doesn't matter how it makes you feel. And that's the thing that's kind of lost. And I think we have almost become like desensitized to the ability to say whatever we want to say, and confusing that with whether or not we should actually say those things because it's the right or wrong thing to do. And I also think we live in a period right now where a lot of people, I was just watching Glass Onion, and someone said something in that movie about like being a truth teller, right? About, um, they said, oh, I, am happy to always be the one to tell the truth because it's fact. And I think Daniel Craig is the one who says, like, it's a very dangerous thing when we confuse the right to say whatever we want to say with being fact. Because just because we can say it doesn't mean we should, or it's true, or it's morally right. We have a responsibility to be emotionally intelligent as members of this society, to know why something we say is appropriate or isn't appropriate, and how it's going to make someone feel. And a lot of people don't really think before they speak. And that's where we see aggravation come out, not only online, but in protests, and people get emotional and react emotionally. It's because they're dying for the right to say whatever they want to say, but they don't understand how it makes other people feel. And they dismiss anyone that disagrees with what they say because they believe what they're saying is fact.
That is true. A lot of us, we don't, a lot of us feel we're right. Sometimes we feel entitled, though it also ultimately comes down to responsibility. And like you mentioned, that having that moral, being able to say, hey, this isn't right. I shouldn't say it. And if I do say it, I'm going to owe up to it. Hey, I called you something. I was upset. Something was going on at that moment and I need to lash it out. And I'm sorry that it ended up that way. And miscommunication happens too. Sometimes you say something and from one perspective, everyone knows that you're being sarcastic. Like with comedy, this is like totally random, but with comedians, they say something that's totally, you're not supposed to say that out in the public, but mindset, we know we're in a comedy club. He's saying it as a joke. No, we're not going to kill kids just for the heck of it. He's saying it part of the joke. Granted, you
Right.
shouldn't really joke about that, but some comedians joke about it and people take that to heart. But it goes back to miscommunication being, well, communication, knowing what's being said. And if you don't understand it, ask too, it doesn't hurt to ask.
100%. No, it never hurts to ask. Teachers have been telling me for a long time, like, there's never a bad question. So that's something that I think we should all embody and know that, like, if we don't know something, if we don't know enough about something, we should always ask and learn more from people that have devoted time and energy into knowing those things. And even at a protest or a riot, if you're there and you don't necessarily know what the message is, you can ask. When people do go to protests, I encourage them to volunteer and just reach out to the people and organizers of those protests and say, "Hey, how can I help?" Right? That's something that I have done throughout my career of protesting and going to events, and by just volunteering, I've been able to join a lot of different amazing organizations and spaces and learn, especially as a white cis male going into predominantly spaces of color. You're talking about on one societal level being at the high end of privilege of being white, straight, cis, and then going into a space of historically disenfranchised groups of people and saying, no, you're going to be the ones that teach me, like not demanding they teach me, because there's a lot of emotional baggage behind people of color and emotional work behind people of color explaining to white people why these things are wrong. And that's why I encourage other white people, other white men, to get involved with groups like White People for Black Lives, Stand Up for Racial Justice, where it's other white people who are helping teach and educate white people about these issues, about these protests and movements, and learning how to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression and suppression for our brothers and sisters, because by going and asking and not just coming in and saying, oh, I know everything, why I'm here, what I'm doing, what's best to do. Asking questions and asking for direction are by far the best way to move forward at protests and riots, especially when a protest moves into the territory of a riot. White people can put a lot of people of color at risk by unnecessarily aggravating events, right? When white people come in angry at the police, angry at the situation, and they come in with the mindset of disrupting and causing property damage. At a peaceful protest that's organized as a peaceful protest, that is harmful to the movement, right? You don't want to put the people you're trying to help at risk by becoming an aggravator. And at the end of the day, if things get very violent And at a protest and a riot, the first people the cops are going to be shooting at are not the white people, it's the people of color, unfortunately. So that's why, as white accomplices, allies, we need to come in and ask, how can I help? What do you want us to do? How can I be of service? How can I be an accomplice here to you? And really taking that direction from the people leading the events, Black and Brown community members, LGBTQ community members, and letting them set the tone for what the event's going to be. Now, there are plenty of examples too where they say, no, we need to be, upset and, escalating this. And that's where you find white people being asked to the front lines, and you have the whole hands up, don't shoot notion where you put white bodies in front of Black and Brown community members to really show a strong sense of solidarity and, commitment against these institutional and systematic forces at play, continuously suppressing and oppressing people of color. So there's a lot, but I think, the important thing is going in with an open mind and asking questions, asking how to help, and asking where to be of service at these events.
Most definitely, like you mentioned, ask questions. It's well, if you're laughed at least it probably, well, maybe it wasn't the right question, but at least you have an idea on what
Yeah,
the curiosity. Never let curiosity work the best of you. If no, I said that wrong, but yeah, just let just allow curiosity to grow because you're always going to learn at the end of the day. And when you have an
yeah,
open mind, what else can you say?
exactly. Exactly.
So that actually will wrap up today's video. So thank you guys for tuning in. Joshua, thank you for this amazing information for someone who's not out there in the streets doing all these amazing things. Just being able to learn from others. And you definitely taught me a lot with these protests and activists.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I know we can keep going on for hours and hours, but we got to keep it short. But I'm definitely happy to continue talking about these things, answering questions, and helping, yourself and anyone else get connected to different organizations around Long Beach, Los Angeles, anywhere in California, really. One of the things that I am happy to do as an accomplice is, take the messages of the groups that I'm working with and help, spread them far and wide and make sure that those that are interested know how to get connected. So I'm happy to be a resource to help people do that.
There you go, folks. If you guys have any questions, let us know. Leave them in the comments, drop them in the chats. We will also provide any information if you guys are interested in different activists, different groups. As always, pass a smile, stay safe, always stay awesome. PSA, and I'm gonna see you guys next time.